welcome to my YouTube channel, and today I'm asking Sam, my favorite instructor, to do a mock oral with me for the upcoming CFI check ride. We'll definitely learn a lot, and if I pass today, I'll go on to the actual real check ride. What's the plan, Sam?
Yeah, the plan is we're going to get through as much as we can today. Obviously, it'll be a little bit less involved than the actual check ride will be, but we'll try to hit the main points. And as I was mentioning earlier, the CFI check ride is largely conversational. There's not necessarily, especially when it comes to the FOI portion, correct or incorrect answers. It's more your understanding of how the theories of the FOIs get applied and how you would recognize them and use them. So we're going to be discussing that a bit. There obviously are other portions from a technical standpoint, like the technical subject areas, that really do have more correct answers than not correct. But it's all about the examiner's looking for how you implement these things into everything you teach, right? So technical subject areas specifically, they're not necessarily going to sit down and say, hey, tell me about runway incursion avoidance. They will if they have to, but ideally you're incorporating the ideas of runway incursion into all of the lessons you're teaching, whatever it is, right? So keep that in mind as we go forward. But we're going to start by going through some of the FOI stuff, and then we'll get into some of the more technical areas.
Okay, let's do that. It's been a while since I've practiced FOI, but this will be a good refresher. I'll have few of my slides handy. I do have a set of slides that I will use for teaching as needed.
Okay, sounds good.
But I'll try to just do some Picasso drawing for starters.
Alrighty, I assume you've been brushing up on the new CFI ACS.
Absolutely.
Yep, and it's really not much different, but one or two things specifically, not even so much in the oral, it's mostly in the flight. All right, but we'll just kind of start talking a little bit about some of the fundamentals of instructing. You took your FOI written exam.
I did.
And how did that go for you?
It went well with a 97%.
Okay.
And I continued momentum to do a AGI test, which is largely the same as commercial. So for all you folks out there, there is a tiny step from FOIs to having a AGI certificate, which I now have.
Very good.
So looking forward to teach.
All right. So getting into the FOI stuff, the first question I just want to kind of talk about, or the first subject area I like to talk about, is the laws of learning. And can you just specifically, can you just give me a quick overview of the laws of learning? But my question to you is, which one, or maybe two, do you feel are the most important, or do you feel have affected you throughout your learning the most, and how do you plan to maybe use those or address them with your students?
Well, let's see how we open this up. As we embark on teaching new students, and they can be younger with zero experience or older, there are some common laws that would apply to the person being able to absorb and learn. And we'll have to, first of all, agree and define on what is learning. When we teach a student, we are looking to observe their change of behavior. They go through the cognitive stage where you tell them it's only 15 knots of crosswind limitation for this plane. You got it? It's like, yes, 15 knots. He was able to repeat it back, not necessarily anything has learned. But then next thing we practice the flight, and we listen to 80s, and we hear 270 at 20 knots crosswind, 20 knots wind, and we are landing runway, for example, 190. Student has to be able to apply that knowledge, quickly deduct what's the crosswind, is there any gust, and produce, well, if I would ask him, like, okay, we're landing this runway, what's happening with the wind situation, he should be able to tell the crosswind component is X. Then he would be looking to see them to associate, to apply all the knowledge that was learned across multiple areas of learning. How apply the crosswind correction, how to safely buffer the speed for any gust factor. When all the knowledge comes together in application, that is when we can conclude that learning has occurred.
Okay.
Now, if it go into the laws of learning, the acronym mini, like that, I call it a favorite, is the Ripper.
And just to that end, as I always say, not just for instructors, but students alike, should always try whenever possible to go to the source material. So, if I bring this up and you're going to start talking about it, you might just say, hey, I'm going to be referencing or pulling this from the Aviation Instructor's Handbook, chapter, whatever, just so me as the student or the person you're talking to can look it up and kind of follow along.
Okay. Don't think I'll recall the chapters exactly, but
that's okay. You can always look at that going forward, or even if you don't know in the moment before you start talking about it, you can look it up and just say it looks like this is in chapter 3.
Thank you.
It's just a good way not only to keep the student on the same page as you, but it's also a good way to keep yourself on the same page as what you're trying to talk about.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So back to the moment where we got to the laws of learning. We have a student, he's willing to learn, and throughout my experience, I will have to observe and as necessary correct what's going on with the readiness to learn, because there are a few laws that either detract or help to learn. And the first one, it happens to be the readiness. And the readiness, this is where we can almost expand back into the Maslow's pyramid. We have several layers starting with physiological. If I see the student who's really anxious to go to the bathroom or maybe checking his calendar, they may not be ready to learn in time crunch or otherwise. But physiological is that simplest, fed, had bathroom breaks, and overall physiologically ready to learn.
Yeah.
We next on the Reaper is effect. Now, flying is an emotional adventure. There are moments that stick in the brain, and if we'd ask a person, what do you remember from your first 5 years? You probably come up with a handful of events. You met your grandma for the first time or something like this. Those memories that are imprinting in your head, typically they have some form of, some aspect, some effect. There will be moments where the new student is learning to land, and certain moments will stick forever, which is important to keep in mind, that those kind of experiences, according to the primacy, tend to be the strongest. If you put a student in a situation where he gets this law of effect and he learns the wrong thing, will be really hard to get it out of him. Now, all that done is through exercise. We go out, we practice patterns, we brief what we do, and then we do what we briefed. And through exercise, we build first the muscle memory, second we build the understanding, and eventually people say, well, I just feel it. It's a gut feel. It gets to that automated response. While initially student will be going through the checklist, 3000 RPM at beam the numbers, etc. Eventually he'll be just moving controls without thinking of those specific steps. Intensity. Intensity. Well, that has multiple factors to that. We want to keep this knowledge going. We want to have experience building up. we typically would recommend students to fly more often, to keep the knowledge building up so it doesn't fade away. And at the same time, human body is just built that way. If there is pressure, if there is a requirement from outside factors to adopt, it will grow, and so your brain does, and so your muscles do. So we really have to be thinking of that, not letting student to have too much of a time off between lessons. That doesn't help the student, doesn't help his budget. And last but not least is the recency. That is why the eligibility requirements for any check ride require 3 hours of dual training in the last 2 months. All DPs are our friends, they want us to pass. They don't want someone to show up with no flying in the last 3 months because that recency law wouldn't be in place. They would probably forget something, kind of just like me not repeating those learning laws in the last several weeks.
Okay, very good. And so what of these different laws, which ones do you feel are either most important or most relevant throughout training? And specifically, is there any 1 or 2 instances that you can think of in your own personal experience where 1 or 2 of these have played a significant role in your own learning?
For me, I would say intensity being one of the key ones. I can feel that shoulder pressure move my way if I get more of a constructive criticism of improvement suggestions. It helps. But there are some instructions that they just go out of their way to being so nice. Oh, you did great, the landing was great, all great, good job. That is less stimulative. So again, very depending on the person, there are different learning styles, different teaching styles. Keeping that in mind, not suggesting that is the key. On opposite side, the recency for me has been on the lower side. Like they say, you learn to ride a bicycle and you just know it. The other one for me personally has been the law of effect. Nothing sticks in the memory as hard as an electrical fire on one of your initial dual flights, or my actual situation where the 058 engine was quitting above the mountain gorge. So going through the checklist, dialing 7700 and estimating glide path to a safest place. After that, situation with effect really stuck with me.
Okay. Would that be, that situation sounds kind of, should I say, intense. Would that be more the law of effect or the law of intensity that helped that learning take place in that case?
It is both. So I guess what we're looking in the law of effect is the feedback. We have to give both positive and negative feedback to the student. And the negative feedback has to be, that's the hardest part. It's really easy to say, hey, good job, you landed today safely. It's much harder to say you were 200 feet from your aiming point, you flared for way too long, and specifically, being specific, for 500 feet, and when you touched down, you were right next to the windsock, which means we had less than half of the runway remaining, and that, per our SOPs, is beyond with the point where you should have gone around. So next time when you land, look at your aiming point. If you're not able to, and set the visual mark. If you're not able to touch down before the visual mark that you've set, go around, because it's always easier to go around than to salvage the plane in the last feet of the runway. So both negative and positive feedback, recognition, praise where appropriate, they contribute to the law's effect, just like they did in my situation, debriefing what happened with electrical fire, with the engine quitting over mountain ranges. There.
So you were with a CFI when both those things happened?
Electrical fire was with the CFI, the one we know and love, and the engine malfunction was on my first ever cross-country solo, going Hillsborough to Astoria.
Okay, get carb kit on.
So in that case, it was more the plane or the situation kind of teaching you rather than an instructor teaching you, but nonetheless, the effect of the outcome was still a positive learning experience for you, it sounds like.
Correct, which then I complemented, and I recommend to do that with a good debrief. Getting back on the ground safely, laying out all that happened and that was done, and discussing that with a CFI.
Okay.
And that completes that learning input that you can get from the teachable moment.
Okay, cool. Anything else to add on these laws of learning before we move on?
That's all I can recall in the Reaper.
Okay. Well, that sounds good. What we're going to do here, and I'm going to show you a video here, and we will, just because I keep this video private for one-on-one use, we'll keep it, omit it from the actual video here. But
cut it out.
But I'm going to show you this video of a clip from me and a student.
Okay, well, there's a lot. Okay, so let's think about this. So we saw the video where the landing, short field landing didn't go as well. The student landed short and went into defense, right into defense. So defense mechanisms get in the way naturally. Human body is looking to be back at comfort zone. If you're cold, you dress up. That's kind of a defense mechanism. If you fail, you look for an excuse. The acronym that we use to just memorize them, and it doesn't mean that I would write it out every time that I talk, but
you can just talk about the ones specific to what you witnessed.
So just I'll spell them out: denial, denial, repression, repression, displacement, rationalization, fantasy, compensation, rationalization, fantasy, P, compensation, and reaction formation. Okay, so denial, repression, displacement, rationalization, fantasy, compensation, and reaction formation. I would cross out reaction formation on this. The first one that was always is the rationalization, otherwise known as excuses. From the factual point of view, landing on a short field does not preclude you from using power. If you're low, you add power. If you're high, you slip. The student went into both denial, no, this wasn't my fault, and rationalization. It's 20 feet on altimeter. That's been set before the pressure maybe even changed. I also do feel a little bit of a, what's this word? Aggression towards instructor in that video, which I don't know the background, may have been caused by some prior communication or not, but this gets in the way heavily if the student starts being defensive versus learning, and that's another observation. So again, denial of, well, actually, let me think about that. The person did not deny he landed short. He denied the reason which led to that. So that was rationalization.
And just to summarize, his rationalization was what?
Rationalization was that, oh, I landed short because you made me change my altimeter setting by 20 feet.
Okay, and so why does that argument, even if I had made him change his altimeter setting, which, just to set the stage, I mean, I corrected his altimeter setting to what it should be, but even if I had made him change it by 1,000 feet or 700, what doesn't matter, why would that rationalization not hold up?
It would not hold up because on a short final we are flying visual. We're not looking at instruments, we're not trying to be at exact altitude, at exact 67 feet away from threshold. That's just not how we land the plane. So that argument didn't hold water at all. which is why I bring up that there's some aggression as well as trying to rationalize the error against the altimeter set.
Okay.
There was no fantasy, and I would say displacement. He was displacing the blame from himself to altimeter to some short gust winds or something else. Everything is at fail, at a reason to fail, not himself. As one of my favorite YouTube bloggers said, he definitely spent a lot of time rationalizing instead of flying the plane at that moment.
Okay. So if that was your student or you were dealing with that student in that situation, how would you approach that?
Yeah, so you have to be really careful. It's easy to get in a dead-end situation where emotions take over and learning stops. Probably the first thing I would do is just let this rest for a little bit, not even touch on this in the next 20 minutes. But the one important question to ask once the emotions cool down is like, well, hey, was there something that you could have done to correct this? Were you coming in on a short final? Were you able to see your low at some moment? What tools did you have to correct? What tools did you have at your disposal to correct the situation? If you didn't use them, was there any reason? Although that's a little bit of emotional question again. But being objective, you landed short by 100 feet, which means you probably were low by 40, maybe less. And being constructive, offering discussion first and then teaching second on what tools were available and how to use them.
So did you notice any tools that would have been available that he was not utilizing properly? If you want to come look at it one more time, you can.
Didn't feel like he used the throttle at the short final.
Let's take another quick look and.
Just on the short final. Hand on the throttle, so I can't really see. Here, hand off the throttle. Well, removing hand off the throttle on a short final really has no reason. This hand has nothing else to do but to be on the throttle, because if you need to go around, you better be ready.
Yeah. Or even if you didn't need to go around, in this particular instance, what else would it have been used for?
Approach didn't seem all that stable. Maybe that's just a video artifact, but maybe that had a role in it. Hard to see what airspeed is.
Well, I mean, based on, you kind of said it earlier, but I mean, even if he wasn't going to go around, had he had his hand on the throttle, how could that have helped fix this issue?
At least in two different ways. It is possible that the throttle slid out ever so little when he removed the hand, just because the friction lock maybe wasn't in place, and he was no longer in control. And second, it deprived him of a natural ability to just add some throttle. You're coming in on a super short final, you're maybe flaring. Even there, you could have added just a little, well, we'll try not to say a little, maybe specifically, a 1/4 inch of power would have helped to extend the flare and touch down exactly on the aiming point.
Right, just adding a little power would have gotten him there. That's all I needed to do, right? But he just gave up. He had the power to idle, and he had both hands on the yoke, which we know is a big no-no. Okay, and he just held on and just let it come down where it was going to come down, and didn't do anything to change it. So, and to an extent, what Hazardous attitude is somewhat there.
Yeah. Well, I'll circle back to readiness maybe in a second, but we have macho, we have anti-authority, which I probably see a little bit of that. We have resignation, which I guess you can probably bring in at the very short final, just removing the hand off the throttle. It's kind of felt a little bit of resigning. Impulsivity. And what else am I forgetting? Anti-authority, resignation, impulsivity, macho. There's always one that escapes.
Yep,
Cool.
macho, anti-authority, resignation, impulsivity, and yeah,
Okay.
I always have a hard time remembering the last one too. It's um, invulnerability.
Invulnerability, of course. Yeah. Well, crossing out one by one, invulnerability wouldn't be the cause. Resignation, I would say yes, half a check mark. Anti-authority, I would say yes as well. Macho, maybe just a tad bit of macho in impulsivity. There was no rush during departure to not double check the instruments. So impulsivity. There was a little bit of a student's feedback about how he handled situation, which maybe spoke to the macho. But the most that I sensed, I wonder if anti-authority got in the way with you, with a situation where you corrected the altitude, and him just going on a rant of, on a motion to proving you wrong. I was like, no, I know better, and now, oh look, I failed because of you, because you did that change to me. So I would say a couple check marks on anti-authority, a little one on resignation, and maybe half a check mark on impulsivity.
Okay.
Not sure, maybe.
Okay, sounds good. I could agree with all that. All right. Why don't we continue on here? We'll move on from the FOIs and take a look at some more technical areas. Let's see. All right. So let's see. I had you plan a flight, a cross-country flight, correct?
I did. We are flying from Twin Oaks to Albany using
Okay.
a 2011 chart, but that's just for the teaching purpose.
Now, just on a matter of technicality, is Albany considered a true cross-country?
No,
Okay, and why is that?
because it's 2 miles short of the 50.
Does it need to be
50?
50
above.
or does it need to be over 50?
It needs to be over 50, so 50.1 counts,
Yeah.
which Hillsborough to Albany is 50 and a little bit, 51, I think.
Yep. Okay, so that's an important thing to keep in mind because you don't want your students, of course, going under 50, but you don't want them either going just to 50 and trying to count it as a cross country because it ain't a cross country. So,
Yeah.
okay, that's fine. So Albany, and so why don't you just walk me through not just how you plan this flight, but specifically how you would be teaching your student to plan this flight and everything that goes into that flight planning process.
This is where, so if I get to teach, and maybe I won't do the whole lesson,
Yeah,
but
just
let me
focus on-
outline, because the way that I plan to teach, I have, using the instructor handbook and the pilot book, I prepared some slides which help me as the visual. Nothing helps as much as the visualization, and that could be a good starting point. Now I'll jump through at least the key basics. Depending on the student, there may be more or less that we need to. Picture isn't all that great, but if you can see,
Yep,
the main
fine.
thing
If you
is the
want to
picture.
turn the light off, you can, if it'll help at all.
Yeah, it's fine. So before teaching the cross country, and definitely before executing solo or allowing students to go solo, we'll have to cover a lot of basics. How to build a route, what to watch for, what wind correction angle is, navigation basics, tools, frequencies, and so I've built all that in a teaching plan with some visuals that I would use. Well, and so the first topic I will start with heading versus track. On this map, going from Twin Oaks to Albany, you draw a straight line, and the first question to the student would be, well, great, but which way do we point the nose at? And the airplanes fly with the air. There is always at least some air movement, and often more than none, it is a crosswind, which means we have to fly at a different heading versus the course that we want to get at. Because what happens if, like there's a picture down below, if you point your nose towards your point of destination and the wind keeps blowing you to the side, the airplane will go on a parabol kind of track, which will mean a lot more flying and constant recorrection towards the destination point. If you appropriately calculate the wind correction angle, that will allow you to crab into your destination, correcting for wind. And there are tools which I will demonstrate how I did that. The other navigation basics is younger students may not realize there is a magnetic course and a true course. The Earth has a magnetic pole which is not located at the same point where the physical North Pole is. Moreover, it moves every year little by little. So airplanes fly with a compass or other navigational equipment that senses magnetic fields, and we have to be aware of that correction needed between the true course and magnetic course. Again, looking at the map, I drew the line from Twin Oaks to Albany, and I got a 172 true course. But that would not be the angle that or the heading that I fly with my magnetic compass because of the magnetic variation that exists in the area where we are.
Okay.
It used to be 14.5 degrees. I believe it's slightly less as of today. So we'll go over that, how the true course and magnetic course correlate, how to change them. Second,
Good.
the next, we talk about the compass deviation. If we're using a Cessna, we have a physical compass which we'll use to realign the directional gyro from time to time. And on a compass, there would be a little note that will tell us what's the angle. What's the heading to fly to get to a 180, to a 270. So depending on electrical systems, magnetic fields, and specific wiring of an airplane, there is a compass error that's specific to a airplane and specific to the heading. So there we talk deviation.
Deviation come from? Why does that exist?
So compass is nothing more but a magnet that floats in some form of mechanism, and it aligns itself with a magnetic field primarily generated by the Earth. But if your lately installed GPS is running an electrical wire which generates magnetic field around the wire, that influence will create a change in the compass indication.
Okay.
So otherwise known as installation error for the compass.
Okay.
Another good reason not to put your iPad next to the compass, because there is a pretty powerful magnet. And I think in the old days when ship traveled far, that was a pretty big terrorist action to put a magnet under the compass, because then the ship gets lost. So don't put anything magnetic next to your compass.
All right.
Next we'd go over performance. So let's say we got to this point. We know that we are flying the true course of 175. We correct for magnetic deviation on the sectional chart. That was about 15.3 east is least. And we correct for the compass deviation. Now we have to ask ourselves, well, how...
magnetic deviation, you said?
Did I misspoke? Variation.
Yeah, variation, okay. Yeah. Variation,
sorry. I may have misspoken.
Okay.
So now we have to ask ourselves, how fast do we get there? Which will lead to the question, how much fuel we have. For that we use performance charts for an airplane. Cessna gives us climb and cruise performance charts, and we have to make sure we have enough fuel with fuel reserves, VFR or IFR, and we break down the flight into segments of the same type. So climb, from a takeoff to the top of climb, that's one segment with a little bit of taxi fuel. Then we estimate, in my case, the total of 22 miles cruise between top of climb, and then we initiate descent. A different fuel consumption happens that we can find from the table at climb, at cruise, and then at descent. So using performance charts, we can estimate the fuel consumption. Before we even get there, it looks like a slide that I need to add, plus CAS to test slide. Before we even get to estimating the fuel, we have to ask ourselves, how soon do we get there? And the only speed that matters to understand the time to the destination is the ground speed.
Okay.
We know it's a 48 nautical miles Twin Oaks to Albany. If we will be flying exactly 48 knots ground speed, then we would get there in exactly 1 hour. However, first factor that gets in the way is the wind correction angle that we earlier discussed. And using the E6-B, we can estimate the wind correction angle, and that also gives us the actual ground speed. So we know the heading correction, and we know the ground speed that we're moving in. For the exercise that I did, I came up with 68 knots of ground speed versus 73 knots in climb. So there is a different ground speed that depends on the wind.
So your conclusion based on your results would tell you that the winds are what? Versus in your climb versus your cruise?
Well, the winds weren't a conclusion, that was the source. So going on to aviation weather, we're using the winds aloft table, and we have the closest we have is the PDX, and definitely using the METAR and the TAF for the day off. As of last night, we had winds at 210 at 10 knots in Hillsborough, same in Salem, forecasted 210 at 10 knots, and Aurora was 200 at 10 knots. So,
Can I see the?
Yep.
And so, how are you utilizing the winds from the METAR or TAF versus the winds aloft?
Good question. That's where we talk about the stages. For the climb from the departure to the top of climb, the best way we can do is to average between what's on the ground and what's at altitude.
Okay.
As we do this math, we put in some buffer just to be conservative. Always better to have fuel left than come up short.
Okay.
For the cruise portion, again, those are estimates and they will change, which is why we need the fuel reserve. For the cruise altitude, I would use the PDX winds aloft weather. There are some tools that allow you to estimate winds at more locations than just those key airports. So that's a use, keeping in mind that winds change more often than the provided weather forecast. So keep a buffer, and which is another good reason to note your actual time on the segment versus your forecasted time. If you see you're constantly getting longer times, for example, that probably means you need more fuel.
Okay.
So weather is the source. Wind correction angle and the ground speed helps us to estimate the segment's duration. We estimate the fuel based on a known ground speed and the distance that we need to travel.
And so all these calculations are meant for us to be able to navigate in what way?
Ask that again.
What type of navigation are we using when we're doing all these calculations?
Visual.
Is that what it's called?
Pilotage.
What is
No,
pilotage?
1 second. Dead reckoning, right? No, I mean, it's a mix. So,
What is pilotage and dead reckoning?
dead reckoning is the flight with known checkpoints, headings, airspeeds, or at least pre-calculated airspeeds, which we verify against the checkpoints, be that a visual or If we're IMC, we would be using GPS or VOR points. So that's the dead reckoning.
Okay.
And then I'm stuck with a pilotage, which is just us flying towards Mount Hood.
Yeah, so looking out the window, right? Being like, there's a river, I'm going to follow this river.
Okay, without necessarily taking times or estimating time and route, just
Yeah.
okay.
Just saying I got a map. I see if I follow this river and then take a left at this mountain, I'll get to where I want to go. So I'll follow the river and there's the mountain. I'll just do that.
Okay.
Right? It's like somebody saying, yeah, you want to get to the the McDonald's, you go down 2 miles, you're going to take a right at the gas station, then there's going to be a big oak tree. You're going to go past that oak tree, right? And you're going to go take a left at the second stop sign, right? That's driveage. That's driveage.
Okay, yes, I wasn't able to describe that correctly. So again, to just help myself to memorize that. With the dead reckoning, we have pre-calculated locations defined sometimes by visuals or by instruments, expected time of arrival, and we cross-check actual time of arrival versus expected. If we would simply, if we would have zero navigation plan or flight plan, we would follow the I-5 down to Albany. We know that road takes us to Albany. We know it's a little bit east of our location. We'd fly east until we see the I-5, and then we follow I-5 to Albany. This would be pilotage.
Okay. So when we're doing these calculations and filling out the SNAV log, that would be for the purpose of?
That would be for the purpose of dead reckoning.
Okay.
But intended to use visual references for the checkpoints.
Sure, they support each other.
Right.
Right. Okay. Good. Keep going.
Okay, so we estimated performance, we accounted for ground speed, and then we get into the road planning. So the simple way, if the terrain allows, just go the straight line. That's always quickest, simplest, and cheapest way to get there. But we have to account for both the vertical limitations of airspaces as well as lateral limitations if you're flying low. There could be restricted areas, there could be NOTAM, so we have to plan the route to go through where we can go, avoid TFRs or other closed areas. If we are flying by instruments, we have to account for availability of those navigational aids. If we're flying VOR, we have to be within 40 miles from the VOR to receive the signal guaranteed. If you're flying with a GPS, we need to make sure that GPS has no outage planned at least, and we have the receiver on board that is functional. Another items that go into planning, once we calculate the fuel, and if it's cross-country is not a 48 miles but maybe 480 miles, there are some fuel stops, and better be with some alternatives, some additional fuel stops. So we do some planning ahead of time to understand our refueling capabilities. If we're not able to get to the destination, we'll look into what other alternative airports or alternative means of transportation. Okay. So there we get into more of a logistical, let's plan the trip kind of point of view. Besides just being able to fly, how do you make this trip happen? Sometimes the best way could be to get on a bus or a rental car. When we do all that, we of course want to make sure that the charts are final and current, that before the flight we have up-to-date NOTAMs, both for navigational aids, departure and destination. So having charts and documents up-to-date is important, and definitely check and recheck the weather, because if the Pacific Northwest surprises us with a cumulonimbus clouds, we want to reconsider our plan and change that.
And where do you check the weather?
There are two, well, of course, nowadays you have a lot of imagery in the ForeFlight, so that's a single go-to place, but they pull from the NOAA, North something, that weather website, and aviationweather.gov. Plus the one now, If the weather is clear and shiny, it's easy to get a sky clear visibility unlimited forecast, and that should be sufficient. But the tool that's available and free for all pilots to use is the actual phone briefing. Just like the website is named 1-800-WX Brief, the same phone number leads you to the person whose job is it to read and interpret the weather.
Who are those people?
That's the flight service organization.
Flight service.
Flight service.
Yeah, flight service.
Which is paid by our tax dollars, and those guys are good at interpreting what they see. If VFR flight is not recommended, they are obligated to tell you that VFR flight is not recommended, and that would be a major red sign to do any. I misspoke. VFR. If I misspoke, I meant to say VFR flight not recommended means you do not fly VFR in a plane that cannot fly IMC. So that's where the weather would come from. A couple of websites, aviationweather.gov, 1-800-WX Brief, but all that is available through the ForeFlight. Doing the briefing spits you out all the relevant information in one place.
Okay. Sounds good. So
A couple other things that we would consider. So if you're doing a dead reckoning flight with the visual checkpoints, we want to pick the checkpoints that make sense. There are, on the map, we have a few visual checkpoints that recommended with a flag on them. Those are easy to spot. On my route of flight, Salem is definitely a checkpoint that you can't miss, which also coincides with my top of descent checkpoint. And another one that I used was a drag racing strip in Woodburn. Very noticeable, looks like a landing strip, but it's not anymore.
Okay, and how high will you be descending from? What altitude did you decide to go to?
For the flight that I planned, since we're going slightly west, we'd be flying at 6,500 feet to keep at the recommended altitude. Flying west keeps us at dictates us to fly at even for thousands plus 500.
Okay, and so your course, or your, what is it?
So I
based off of?
calculate the course, the true course on a line drawn from Albany to Salem is 175, altitude 6,500, wind direction predicted 210 at 10 knots, a lot actually higher. I still can't believe I printed that. 41 knots up at cruise altitude. Temperature, which helps us to transfer from the indicated or calibrated airspeed to the true airspeed, and that gives us the planned true airspeed.
Okay, and so when we're deciding on that altitude, is that based off of our true course?
When we are deciding for the altitude, that is based off the magnetic course, because as we fly the plane, really hard to predict or recalculate the variation.
Okay.
But we know the course direction that we are moving in, and not the heading, because if you're correcting for the wind, we may be pointed 170, yet the actual track could be 190, which is a 1,000 foot difference in altitude.
Okay, so what is your magnetic course then?
So from here we calculate the wind correction angle at 4 degrees and the easterly variation of 15.5. For the airplane that I'm flying, there is no deviation on the compass because it's electronic. But in a Cessna or any other planes, we account for that. And then the compass heading, in my case, to fly is 163 versus the true initial course of 175.
So that's your compass heading, which will put you on a magnetic course of what?
On the magnetic course of it was plus minus, so 179. So we deduct the wind correction angle, but the magnetic course still accounts for the variation.
So that would be what?
163 less 4, that would be 159.
Okay, yeah, 160,
Right.
159, whatever, you know, half a degree is not going to make a huge difference. All right, so 160 would be our magnetic course, and so that would then tell you that 6,500 would be the appropriate altitude.
No. Yeah, no. That's a moment of shame. I'll probably have to delete that one.
We don't delete moments of shame, we learn from them.
Yeah, I can't even rationalize how did I screw this one up, but both my true course and my magnetic heading are westerly.
Westerly?
I'm sorry. Let me look at this.
That's the problem, you're looking at it upside down.
Easterly. That may be it. So, okay. What I had here's 180. I had a 175 course and a 163 magnetic compass heading. Magnetic compass heading, including the wind correction angle, which means the true course would be 159, because that was a 4 degrees of the wind correction angle. All of them are easterly, and I put a westerly altitude. Okay?
So what would be more appropriate altitude?
Well, either 5,500 or 7,500.
Okay, and which one would you choose?
I chose 6,500 because I confuse odds and evens.
Yeah, but which one would you choose then between 5,000?
Well, let's think. So if I look at the winds aloft, the winds are headwinds for me mostly, and they increase with altitude. We're 41 knots forecasted at 6,047 at 9,000. They do come down higher up, but that's irrelevant. The one factor that would go into deciding the altitude would be winds aloft. Of course, assuming that terrain is no factor, which in our case it's not. The maximum elevation figure on our route of flight is 4,700, and that's over Salem. So I wouldn't plan for anything below MAF. So 5,500 would be the minimum safe, and no question asked. Now, like another thing I mentioned, we want to stay clear of airspaces unless we have to go through them. I'm transitioning right over the Salem airspace. The airspace goes up to 2,700 MSL. If I'm flying with a margin above that airspace, I would be no factor for the traffic and no concern for the tower.
Okay.
So again, nothing below 3,000 feet, like an easy route. And while we're flying visually, MAF is a good, safe recommendation of minimal altitude to keep in mind.
What does MEF stand for?
Maximum elevation figure, which means somewhere in that quadrant we have a tower or something, obstacle that extends almost up to 4,700. They always round up.
Which quadrant are we looking at?
This one.
Okay, so they round up. How much do they round up? So if it's a natural, not natural feature, like
Natural
mountain,
versus artificial.
Yeah, right. So if it's natural like a mountain, they're going to round it up first of all to the next 100,
And
then
then
add 200.
200.
Yep. So it's almost up to 300 higher.
Okay.
If it's a man-made item, they're going to round it up and then add 100.
Okay. So that's where my confusion lies. I know there are a couple hundred of a buffer.
So we can see here real quick, if we look in this quadrant, 4,700, the highest point within each quadrant is always marked pretty conspicuously. So 4330 right here, we round that up to 44, add 3, actually they had 300, sorry, they round it and they had 300, not 200. So they had 300 and that gives you the 4,700. I don't know, it can be hard to find quadrants that have man-made ones, but you know,
Probably
you can.
Portland somewhere.
So anyway, that's what they do. They
My
round
me-
it and add 300.
The method I did like this did not make sense exactly because they seem to add more than the rules dictate. That's where I just figured, okay, it's a couple hundred of a buffer,
Yeah.
and they always seem to add 3 or 4 sometimes.
Yeah, it's always rounded up and then add 3, or if it's man-made, then round it up and add 1.
Yep.
So, all right. So, real quickly, can you just show me? Because first of all, your routing here, you chose a. Did you do a direct routing or what did you choose?
Direct.
Oh, and real quickly before we go into that, what altitude did we decide we're going to be on? 5,500 or 7,500?
5,500, just
Okay.
for the exercise sake.
Would there be any advantage or reason why you'd want to do 7,500 in this for this trip?
So the higher we fly, the more efficient, the more miles per gallon we get against the ground,
Okay.
typically. On a short flight, however, we'd spend more fuel climbing up and probably more time than we save on descent,
Okay.
and there's probably no time savings. So for this situation, there is no benefit. Wind is actually worsening at higher altitudes,
Okay.
and the fuel consumption and the time en route will go up.
Okay.
So the most economical for us would be to fly as low as practical, but just staying clear of airspaces. 5,500 seems like a good number.
Sounds good. Do you know of any kind of rule of thumb as far as choosing an altitude per the distance you're flying?
Nope.
A good rule of thumb is, for these shorter type trips, is for every 10 minutes of cruise time, you'd go up 1,000 feet. So in other words, 10 minutes of I guess, overall trip time. So what did you calculate as your estimated time en route for this trip?
I didn't finish filling out the log because I was planning to use that as a teaching moment, so
That's
we
okay.
fill it out together. But we were looking at 48 miles. We have 0.13 of an hour, so that's about 10 minutes for climb. That covers 9 miles of distance, so we're left with roughly 40 miles. Flying at roughly 100 knots, we are spending roughly 25 minutes in cruise to the destination point, but little less to the descent point. So a top of climb to a top of descent is about 15 minutes.
So yeah, total time maybe 35 minutes or so. So if we're using that rule of thumb strictly, that would mean like 3,500 feet. Could be reasonable. Certainly nothing wrong with 5,500. But it would support the idea that 7,500 would be in excess.
Excessive, right.
Right. Okay. All right. Cool. So can you just show me real quick how you measured with, I presume, that little tool, the true course from Twin Oaks to Albany?
Yep. So using this wonderful tool, again, that's assuming we don't actually use ForeFlight, lining up, I have this straight line drone.
So you drew a straight line from...
Twin Oaks to Albany.
Okay.
Then we line up with a horizontal line and...
What is that horizontal line called?
The parallel.
Line of...
The lines that go parallel to
Latitude?
latitude.
Latitude versus longitude.
Right. With a line of latitude, which are all parallel on the globe, and if I center the dot with the track, and then I follow the track, I can see that we are 5 degrees off. Well, this would be a better way. So that is 185.
Let's see. So you got your line on there. Okay, so we're kind of doing that. And then we're going to set our thing there. Okay. And so you're getting, you said you're seeing the line go from here through
185.
there. Yeah, about 186. Yeah, 186 or so. Okay.
Okay.
So is that our true course then?
That is our true course.
Okay.
And I have 175.
Okay. Where did we get 175 from?
Can't explain it.
Well, how did you get, when you got that, what were you using?
The exactly same paper chart, same tool as I'm showing right now, and
You weren't using ForeFlight?
I know I was not.
Okay.
The ForeFlight, I did do the same exercise after that, just to have it handy.
Uh-huh.
And if I would have double checked against for flight, let me see what I actually have. The magnetic heading 182, magnetic course 171. Course, where's the course? I don't think it gives me the course on the new layout. They changed it.
The true course or magnetic course?
The true course.
Yeah, generally, for flight doesn't bother with true courses.
Yeah. But the magnetic course is 171. The correction for wind is +3 in the for flight calculated data, but that close because data is slightly different that they use. And we're still easterly magnetic course, but the true course is westerly. Yeah, I screwed up the numbers.
Yeah. So you can see how easy it can happen
to
to anybody. So obviously it's just something we want to be attentive to when we are teaching and making sure that our students are understanding it as well, so they're not making those mistakes.
Yeah.
Because they will. They'll
Yeah.
make those mistakes.
And the teachable moment that just happened real time is when you have to do a cross-country planning for your check ride. Don't do that at the last night at 11 p.m. with the dim lights.
Which is what students tend to do.
And I have some experience doing this. Now I'm looking to teach this, and yet I made a mistake of looking at the line and instead of 185 putting down 175 for no good reason.
All right, very good. So let's just say, was there anything else you want to add before we move on to kind of the next portion of this?
In the lesson plan for navigational, there is intercept procedures. So we would, at least once, we would explain to the student that if you have a jet fighter falling next to you, first of all, don't freak out. If you see them rocking their wings, that means follow them. And your response is, again, don't freak out and rock your wings and follow them.
Okay.
However, if the misunderstanding resolved, they would break away, which is that fancy maneuver when they flip over the wing and disappear below you. That means you're good. Whatever happened, they change your mind and you're on your own now.
Okay.
That is part of ACS. Filing and managing the VFR flight plan would be another good tool. Now, I personally had issues filing that with flight service in the air. I couldn't ever reach them on local frequency.
Which frequency was that?
120. I wouldn't remember now, but I was on the chart. 122.5 probably. 122.45, McMinnville remote RCO outlet.
And you said that chart is current?
No, but well, what I would have used off the ForeFlight. Let me see if they changed it. I'm not flying with paper charts. This one is antique. I'm keeping this as a warm memory of my private pilot courses back in 2010. And that's a good question. So if you want to get to hold of flight service station, you open the VFR charts and find the closest communication outlet. Oh, actually, it is changed now. It is 122.2 on the ForeFlight.
Okay.
That's the number I'm looking for. Never had a response. We were actually flying dual with the CFI and like double check that we are dialing correct frequency.
Okay.
Which is another teachable moment. If you can't reach flight service station to file a VFR flight plan, you reach an approach and get a flight following, which worked fine.
Is flight following the same as a VFR flight plan?
It is not. We did not have a formal VFR flight plan open, although we requested. We ended up getting a flight following.
Is there any advantage to one over the other?
Let me see. So the flight following would keep an eye on you as long as there is radar contact and warn you of traffic and restrictions, TFRs.
Okay.
The flight plan filed without you being in active contact with approach would not give you that.
Okay.
You can get one or another or both, depends on what you're looking for. Now, the VFR flight plan filed means that if you do not close it within 30 minutes after estimated arrival, they will go looking for you. And that's a little bit of a safety tool if you end up landing without radio comms and in a remote forest area. If you followed your flight plan path as filed, they'll probably find you quicker.
Okay.
But similarly, being on approach frequency, if you're able to give a sign of a distress, you would be saved. If you just disappeared off their channel, I doubt they would come looking for you.
Probably not.
Is that correct?
Yeah. Sounds about right.
Yep.
Okay.
That was the last moment in this lesson. And then, of course, we will go over ForeFlight, showing how this is done in nowadays most real life.
Okay, very good. So, can you talk to me, and this is kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning of our session, is there any opportunity here for you to incorporate your runway incursion avoidance into this flight planning lesson, assuming you're going over this with a student who's maybe preparing to do this as a cross-country solo or whatever?
Yes. So, cross-country flight planning is one aspect of exercise. We would discuss the airport of departure, airport of destination, and alternatives. And
So what might be an alternative, an alternate between here and
well,
Albany?
there are two. One that is right on the path, that is Salem, although it's towards the end of the destination. The other larger airport on the side would be Aurora, and right under the flight path at the top of climb is the Sportsman.
Okay.
Sportsman is uncontrolled airport, so that's a different beast.
Let's say that they were going to consider Salem as an alternate.
Yep.
How might you discuss the planning in the event that they had to go to Salem, or maybe they were planning to go to Salem as a second stop? How would you discuss the planning of runway incursion avoidance once they're on the ground at Salem?
Well, for that, this should have been discussed before we get to the cross country, but and the way this would be discussed is as following. Well, first of all, understanding what is runway incursions, and I have some slides for that.
Okay.
A runway incursions in a way is when a plane or a vehicle happens to be where it was not authorized to be. Specifically for the runway area in controlled airports, we have a hold short line crossing which, the runway hold short line crossing which requires a clearance. Crossing onto the runway without clearance is an incursion. Now that obviously leads to dangerous situations of collisions, and we don't want that. But another slightly less critical but still not good type of incursion is even the taxi onto the active area, crossing a single solid, single dashed line onto a active movement area of an airport without ground clearance would be another form of incursion.
Could you have a runway incursion at an uncontrolled airport like Albany?
So, yes, if there is a traffic on final, that traffic has priority over the traffic on the ground. And if you're taxi onto the runway and getting in the way of traffic landing, that constitutes a runway incursion as well.
Okay. Good. So yeah, going to continue. How would you be talking about this?
Yeah, we talk about, we make sure that student knows markings, signs of an airport, what to look for, where those areas start, and what is required for the readback. Talking with ground, any clearances of runways, intersections. One of those slides would be helpful. Yeah, so okay. It all starts with briefing. So first thing we do is open an airport chart of Salem and look at, are there any hotspots? How many runways they intersect? Is there any land and hold short places that are marked?
What's a hotspot?
A hotspot is just where airport administration either expects issues to arise or often where they have been arising, close calls or near collisions or collisions.
Okay. How can we find information on these hotspots?
Now, this slide, I'll put it on the video. They are pretty clearly marked with a orange-ish box says HS and a number. On this, we have HS1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
HS2, for example, is the place where two runways nearly intersect, is the threshold of the runway going east.
Is that just what you're seeing, or are you reading that?
No, I'm
Where would you find any information about that hotspot specifically?
on an airport diagram.
Well, that's going to identify where they are, but that's just showing you, hey, this is hotspot 1. How are you going to find information as to why that hotspot is there?
I would expect that is in the digital terminal publication book, but I'm not sure that I've seen that description in text. That's
So what airport are we looking at?
Salem. Well, that's not on the slide, but let's look at Salem.
What airport is this that you have on your thing here?
Golf November Victor.
Well, I'm going to pull that one up.
Okay. So I have an airport diagram. See how it changed from when the slides were taken. And I see none. How interesting.
All right, why don't we go ahead and find one that does have some.
Let's look at PDX. Okay, PDX. 3 hotspots. 1, 2, and 3.
Okay.
I would have to Google to find out where that description is. I guess it exists.
What if we go into the procedures and look at the airport procedures?
We have diagram hotspot. Haha. Well, that was easy. Okay. Portland, Oregon International Hotspot 1. Limited wingtip clearance at taxiway convergence point. Okay. Learned something new today.
Okay, so and what document is this in? Didn't have the convenience of ForeFlight.
Yeah. I believe that's it will be in what we call the green book before, but
Chart supplement.
chart supplement US.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to keep going with your briefing
Okay.
here.
So now that we know where hotspots are and what they represent, so it's either limited visibility or limited clearance, like in one case on PDX. Briefing that's a safe foundation for the taxiing and before taxiing on the ground or before landing to an airport of destination. Once ready to move, have your movement plan. And what I recommend is a paper or ForeFlight, highlight the intersections and the crossing of the whole short lines. So when you receive the clearance, there would be, if there is a runway crossing involved, there would be a clearance with either a hold for further instructions or clear to cross. This would be definitely worth breathing and executing properly on the correct runway.
Okay.
And executing that timely. And another good habit is verbalize the actions. As long as we have 2 pilots in a cockpit, verbalizing what we're doing, what we're planning to do, helps to keep both pilots on the same page.
Okay.
And probably last but not least is we want to keep situational awareness. When we are on the radio, and if we notice that another call sign is taxiing on the same taxiway or runway, which is especially critical in limited visibility environments, that can give us a clue that maybe something is coming our way, and that's additional situation to look into, additional direction to watch for.
Okay.
Probably that. Now, ForFlight definitely gives us convenience of tracking the real-time location on a digital map, so we double check where we are. And if in doubt, ask for progressive taxi instructions. Like me landing at PDX, I would probably ask for progressive taxi if I have to get to the Atlantic Aviation.
Okay. Very good. And among all this, thinking from a risk management standpoint, are there any other threats that we need to be aware of, perhaps internal threats that we should be aware of in our own shortcomings or deficiencies?
The most common one that I've actually experienced myself is confirmation bias.
Okay.
For years and years, you've been getting 3-1 left, Alpha 8 at Hillsborough, and then they're giving your taxi instruction, and suddenly it's 1-3 left. It's very natural for people to take note of 3-1 left, as they've done that for many years.
Okay.
So there's that bias that gets in the way very often. And if I said confirmation and expectation bias, and the confirmation is they said something that you thought you were expecting. It's a mix of confirmation and expectation. And as you taxi, you maybe slightly different situation. Confirmation bias is when you're looking for signs and selectively picking the ways, the signs, the indications that you are where you think you are.
Okay.
Which does lead people to ignore warning signs. Something doesn't match your picture, it's really easy to ignore that, and oh no, look, I see that corner, I know that I am at a specific point where I expect it to be.
Or perhaps you were told 1-3 left, even though you thought you heard 3-1 left, but since the person ahead of you is taxiing to 3-1 left, you assume that you must be correct because that's where they're going.
Yeah, so probably comes down to those two biases, confirmation and expectation. You expected something, you didn't listen, and then you were looking to confirm that you heard it correctly because somebody else had clearly 3-1 left.
Good, excellent. So, for the sake of time here, let's go ahead and move on. I'm going to give you the option. Would you like to continue on to discuss what endorsements you'd be giving a student if they were doing this on their own? Or do you want to move into a maneuver lesson?
Well, I think we can do both. I did repeat endorsements more recently than FYIs.
Okay.
So that should go quicker. And then we do a maneuver lesson, which I haven't practiced, but this I would love to do that.
Okay. Well, if you'd like to try to do both, we can. And if you want to start with endorsements, that's fine. I just want you to tell me if let's say you're going over this cross-country planning with a student who's going on their first cross-country solo. What endorsements and what endorsements would you have needed to have issued thus far, and which endorsements will you need to issue in order for them to do this flight, along with the prerequisites that are going to be required in order for you to have issued these endorsements?
So question is which endorsements and prerequisites? Okay. Well, first of all, let me start with this. Just lead into this. When we are signing off a student for a solo cross country, and this could be hard to see, but I'll tell you what's on them. There are a lot of knowledge blocks that we need to cover, starting with discussing goals and motivations, going to preparation and documents, and then going up to flight principles. Before we discuss level flight, we wouldn't go to anything like landing. Then block of learning in flight, including emergencies, touch and goes, go-arounds, all those maneuvers that are required before any solo. And after initial solo is done and cross-country training is complete, only then we get to your Sole endorsement. So there's a long way of learning and teaching before we get to the cross-country endorsements. To translate that into the endorsements that are required per, and the best advisory circle we have is the 61, 65, whatever is the current version, that spells what has specifically several pages of specific endorsements with the wording proposed, which we could use, but also it has preceding 20-some pages of very good reading explaining various nuances. So that's definitely a guiding and driving document. Endorsements start with the TSA endorsement, making sure that the student is eligible to fly. If he is a US citizen, make sure that you keep as instructor a copy of the passport. That does not apply to introductory flight, but after that you have to make sure that he is legal to be taught, and provide him with endorsement that's called Alpha 14 in 6165.
Is that a required endorsement?
It is a required endorsement to continue the teaching.
You sure?
Yes. Well, I could be wrong, but I am sure.
Well, I have issued that endorsement multiple times. I certainly have not done it for probably the majority of my students.
Well, it doesn't. The fact that no one checks doesn't mean it's not required.
But is there any other option that would suffice short of giving that endorsement?
Oh, well, if you're teaching a commercial pilot and he already has private, that would remove that requirement.
Yeah, that's not what I'm referring to.
Okay. Then either I don't know or I don't understand the question.
So, do you have the option to keep certain records for any length of time instead of issuing that endorsement?
I don't know.
So you check there, of course, their passport would be an option. What would be the other option to check? To confirm their
Birth certificate?
Birth certificate, and what would you need with that birth certificate?
They would need to be born in US.
Right, but how do you know that that birth certificate belongs to that person?
Oh, you would need a picture, photo ID.
Okay.
Some
So
sort.
photo ID and birth certificate. So you get that document, those documents. You can keep those documents in your records, copies of those documents in your records for 5 years instead of issuing the endorsement.
Oh, well, that was not my understanding. I thought you do an endorsement and you keep the documents in the records, in your records, to prove that you issued that endorsement because you had the facts on hand.
Either or.
Either or.
It's not a bad idea to do both, but if you issue the endorsements, you technically do not need to keep the records. And if you keep the records, you don't need to issue the endorsements. So
Where do I go to find that?
1552, whatever, CFR, whatever, 49, whatever it is, the regulation that talks about all the TSA stuff.
Okay. So TSA endorsement versus copies. Thank you. I will read up on this. It did not come across this way when I saw this.
Yep, it's just an either or thing, but okay, so you got that one, keep going.
Then we go through the ground school, just like we do here in Twin Oaks. We teach them a lot on all the knowledge areas required, and once we're done, that gives them this endorsement Alpha 3 for the knowledge areas completed.
And are you planning on doing all that ground school with your student?
Not necessarily. We have, one second. Well, let's reconfirm that by looking at that actual endorsement. So the Alpha 3 in a 6165J, which is current, is a pre-solo aeronautical knowledge, which says, yeah, I was wrong. Take that back. So Alpha 3 pre-solar aeronautical knowledge says that a person has satisfactorily completed pre-solar knowledge test. So that refreshes my memory. Before we get student on his solo path, I as a CFI have to issue a student a knowledge test.
Okay.
And that has to cover, well, ideally, all the knowledge areas required, described in his rating. And I would be looking for a full, complete pass. This is a good reason to identify any knowledge area gaps, refresh those, and those areas have to cover with the specifics of where we're flying. If we would be flying in a class Bravo airspace, we would have to include knowledge areas that are relevant for that. Okay. So that's our pre-solo knowledge test endorsement. It's not that we've given the training, but that the student has passed the test.
So that's the pre-solo knowledge test. Who needs to issue that test?
That is issued by a CFI.
Which CFI?
Well, for this one, I believe any. Yeah, I don't know. From a wording itself, it doesn't suggest that it has to be the CFI who's teaching, but I may be wrong.
So we're looking at the
6187.
Oh, it's just a make model. So this is for 6187 Bravo, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Opening that up. 87. Sole requirements for student pilot. General student may not operate until meets requirements. Aeronautical student pilot must demonstrate satisfactory aeronautical knowledge on a knowledge test that meets the requirement of this paragraph. Test must address student pilot knowledge of applicable sections, airspace rules, procedures, flight statistics. Student's authorized instructor must administer the test. Okay, well, there is an answer. It is an authorized instructor. Now,
Not just an authorized instructor, the students. So you.
Yeah. So if
so does that mean if somebody came from, let's just say one of my students, let's say I had a student who I've soloed and they're kind of working on solo stuff, but I have to go on vacation, whatever, and I need to hand them off to you. Can you just send them solo based off of the training that I've given them and the tests that I've given them?
No, you wouldn't be able to solo them. Even I wouldn't be able to solo them even if I know that you've taught them and you've given them the test. The 6187 requires the authorized instructor to administer the test. Becoming an authorized instructor, I'm a little unsure what that takes, but the gut feel is I would have to refresh where they are on their training. Not necessarily give this training, but at least sit down and spend time understanding their level of knowledge, not just do the formal test. And at some moment that makes me their authorized instructor.
Yeah, I mean, you're an authorized instructor if you're authorized to teach that level of student, private pilots, right? But yes, you would have to not only issue them training, which, training could just be going out and if they're proficient, having them perform the maneuvers for you and you saying, okay, we've done that. But you'd have to issue them the training per what? What training would you need to make sure you issue them before you could consider?
It says applicable sections of Part 61 and 91. Airspace.
Where is it outlined the specific items they need to receive training in prior to soloing?
Well, that would be in the rating SOT, and that includes a lot, which I would have to look at.
6187, what?
Oh, it is in the same chapter. 6187. So we are looking for pre-solo flight training, maneuvers, procedures for a single engine airplane.
Yep.
Wait a second.
What letter is that?
I think
Does it have a letter?
yes. So I think you're talking about this. There's aeronautical knowledge,
Yep.
what applies,
Yep.
and then the test. And then for a single engine airplane, all those maneuvers.
Yep. So 6187 Delta. So you'd have to administer, you'd have to issue training or give them training on every item there. And then you would have to issue them that pre-solo knowledge test. And then you could continue on with your endorsements to allow them to solo.
So again, if a student that you've taught and taken through the training and even the test, but not solo, comes my way and wants to solo, I have to go fly dual on all the maneuvers, climbs, descents, traffic patterns, takeoff, landing, all of them,
Yep.
before I can administer the test and
Right.
then sign them off with their initial solo endorsement, the Alpha 6.
Yeah. Even if I had soloed them, maybe they'd been doing local solos and you're just going to start working with them on cross-country solos. Before you could issue them any solo endorsement, you'd have to do all of that still with them. Now, again, assuming they are a proficient pilot, you could do all of those things in one flight. Right? It doesn't say how much training you have to give for each of those. It just says you have to be able to give training or have, logged training. So you could do all that in one flight, assuming you're comfortable with their ability, issue them your pre-solo knowledge test, review it with them, and then you could issue them a solo endorsement for you. Because remember, anytime a student is out there soloing, they're not flying on their own certificate. They're flying on your certificate, which is why you are required to attest that you have given them this training and made sure they are proficient and capable of doing these solo flights before allowing them to go out on your certificate.
It makes perfect sense from making sure he's safe and your license is safe or certificate.
Yep.
I'm struggling to see the connection between administering the test by authorized instructor and having to rerun all the maneuvers for that person.
Well, it's in a different section. It just talks about the two separate things. You have to administer the test, and then it says here, prior to conducting solo flight, a student must have received and logged flight training for maneuvers, procedures, blah, blah, blah. Demonstrated satisfactory proficiency and safety as judged by an authorized instructor on the maneuvers, procedures by this section, okay? And then student pilots receiving the single, blah, 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 must receive and log training for the following maneuvers, procedures, blah, 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 blah. And then, if we look at the endorsement, 61, this would be pre-solo flight training.
Alpha 4?
Yep. Go ahead and read it. What does it say?
CFI certify that person has received and logged pre-solo flight training for the maneuvers and procedures that are appropriate to the aircraft. We have determined that they have demonstrated satisfactory proficiency. So we both certify they have received, and if I saw that person receive flight training with you, and I see his logbook, and I have your honest word for that, does that enable me to certify that the person has received the training? And I have, I still have to take them up for a good hour to determine that they actually learned it, that their behavior has changed and they are behaving.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is you have to make the determination that they can demonstrate it proficiently. So you can't take someone's word for it. So again, it might, if they're proficient with all of these items, you could do it in one flight. You could go out, you could see, that they can taxi. You can see they do takeoffs, landing, straight level flight climbs and stuff. You can see they can do all this stuff.
But at the same time, I have to make sure that all those are logged as the training received in their logbook. If something is missing, they are not eligible.
Correct, which is why, I mean, even if you did that all in one flight, you would go and log it as dual given for 6187 Delta, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You'd list it out. That's logged training. From you.
Say that again. If I have to give this, they haven't had the training?
No, even if they've had it, it doesn't matter. You go. Let's say you're going to go out with them to be able to make sure they are going to be safe and proficient for solo flight. You're going to go out with them in the flight. You're going to do all of these things. You're going to make the determination. Yes, you've done all these things well, and I approve. So then you're going to log that in their logbook, right?
So the only difference is in real training, there would be more than one go-around required probably. In your case, if you just asking them to show their proficiency, they do a single go-around, they do a single landing and everything else, and they do each of them once. You log that as this has been the dual time.
Yeah, right. I mean, it is dual time, right? And so, yeah, I mean, once, depending on what the maneuver is, may or may not be. Obviously, you always have to think to yourself, okay, if the FAA came and questioned me about this, how am I going to justify that I ensured this person was in fact proficient? Because it's your certificate, right? But yeah, obviously, you'd have to do everything at least once if you're going to log it. But certain things you may.
Okay.
They want to do more than once.
This helps. I thought this would be quicker, but no. Endorsements are a complex topic.
They're a complex topic for sure. We got about 19-ish minutes.
Okay, and then you have to run. Okay.
Well, I'm staying here with the next guy.
Okay.
Which, depending on if he's okay with it, you're welcome to stick around. We're talking CFI stuff. But
I'd love to.
Do you want to continue? Do you want to continue with this, or do you want to move on to a maneuver lesson?
Let's try a maneuver lesson.
Okay, sounds good.
I think I know enough to be dangerous on this. Let me pick something. Performance, ground reference, steep turn, steep spiral, lazy 8.
Sure. Sounds good to me.
Okay. So lazy 8 maneuver. This would be required for the commercial grade student, not for private. Although I would say it's a good maneuver to practice even earlier, because that teaches student to handle airplane through all various airplane behavior, combinations, attitudes, all of that. We are going through both left and right turns. We're going through a faster speed on descent and a very slow speed. We have heavy left turning tendencies from the torque factor, from the P factor as we climb. So all in, this is a good maneuver that's helping student to master the airplane and then demonstrate that he has the mastery. Now what it is the S shape. We start off by the climbing, well in this case a right turn, reaching the maximum pitch up attitude at 45-degree point, from where we arrive at a zero pitch maximum bank attitude at a 90-degree point. That's the top of the 8. Then starting the right turn, descending with a maximum minimum or lowest pitch down at 135 point, again half of that 90-degree turn, and coming out of the descent and of the turn with exactly opposite direction, that 180-degree point where we should be at the same altitude, at the same airspeed as the entry, and then we repeat all that same to the left turn. That maneuver can be asked to be repeated multiple times. Unless the DP basically tells you to stop, you'd be doing that. So what are the key points? We enter the initial climbing turn with a very shallow bank and a normal cruise power. Power doesn't change through the maneuver, and as I quote my one of the YouTube channels, it's a boring 8.
Okay.
So we really don't want to force an airplane in the turn, but what we're using is the overbanking tendency. As we start, as we give the airplane a little bit of a bank to the right in this case, and start pitching up, we're pitching all the way up until that 45-degree point. The airplane will naturally start to increase the roll, increase the bank angle. Depending on the different airplane, like I'll be hopefully teaching RV-12, airplane has very little required input on the control. It's probably more preventing that from overbanking than pushing that into the bank, because as you pitch up, airplane slows and airplane will tend to bank more and more. One important thing to keep in mind is keeping it coordinated. If on the right turn, if we're not giving it enough right rudder, the maneuver will not happen. The airplane would not be able to turn to the 90 degrees before reaching the maximum altitude. So, starting the climb, letting the airplane pitch, starting the climb with forcing the pitch, but letting the airplane bank to the right, and arriving to the maximum altitude with the minimal airspeed. Typically, we expect the airspeed just a little below the, little ahead, little higher, little faster than the stall speed. So let the speed drop, but don't go into the stall. All the way up to that 90-degree point, our nose is pointed higher than horizon. Exactly at 90-degree point, we're looking to cross the horizon line and keep the nose moving down below the horizon line. At the same time, we have to continue the turn, but this is where we initiate the rolling out of the turn. All the inputs should be very slow. We need to give airplane enough time to slowly complete the turn while we are decreasing the bank angle. Okay. This takes practice. I would be very surprised if simply going through the ground portion, one would be able to complete the maneuver. But likewise, without talking through the nuances, through the behaviors expected at those key points, it would be very hard to teach that in the air. So we'll definitely go through the pictures and through the details of the maneuver. Again, slicing through the horizon, not the air, we're letting the nose drop, picking up speed, and we're timing the maximum nose down pitch at the 135-degree point. From there, we initiate the pull out, and this is where the pilot has to judge the descent speed, the airspeed pickup, so that we arrive at the same altitude, at the same airspeed when the wings are level and we're facing the opposite direction from where we started. Okay. It's the first time I'm actually doing this.
Oh, good so far.
So I actually went through my second slide, 45-degree reference point, maximum pitch, 90-degree, approximately 30-degree bank with level pitch, and then we go with the nose slicing through the horizon. Now look at that letter U on the slide. Okay.
Do you have an actual lesson plan made out for this?
I do, but would I Word docs have all the details, links. I'm adding links that I would recommend people to watch, but I rework them into presentable visual aids because I'm planning to use that wherever I can.
It's fine. Yeah, I mean, ultimately a lesson plan is a tool for you, and so that's fine, but I don't know how Jack conducts his check rides. He may or may not want to actually see your lesson plan. So you just want to make sure you have it presentable and to show that you understand the components and how to structure a lesson plan. But
I'll show you. That would be good advice. Yeah, before you run out of time, let me show you what I have, because I think I'll print them in a binder, and no one except Jack will probably ever care to look at them, but why not?
some students might.
It's a
some people learn better that way, right?
$1,500 exercise, you know. Okay, so we talk about that. Now, this begs for discussion of a few aerodynamic phenomena that we experience. The overbanking tendency I mentioned, and this is where we are slowing down an airplane, and the airplane bank turns to increase unless we correct with an opposite aileron. Like, why this is happening? There's a good visual picture, hard to see, but as an airplane is banked to the left, the right wing is traveling slightly faster because it's flying on this outside circle, and so that is generating more lift because of having more relative wind. And if we allow that tendency to continue, this will keep a rolling airplane more into an ever-tightening death spiral. Another, well, all of them, the turning tendencies, and I still have the word left because in this case they're, well, no, they aren't left. I'll remove it.
Okay.
I know the sensitivity. Now we just call them turning tendencies because we do. Torque reaction, precession, slipstream, and the P factor. Torque reaction, prop is spinning clockwise as we look from inside the cabin, and the airplane tends to roll to the left. Obviously, example I have given turning to the right, this tendency is going against the overbanking, so they compensate each other ever so slightly. On the left climbing turn, this would add to the left overbanking tendency, so there was the torque reaction. Precession has to do with the gyroscopic effect of a processor being sorry, did I say processor?
Processor, yeah. Wrong area of your professional life.
We just had a press event 90 minutes ago, and let's say, well, yeah. Anyway, I'll be back to this in 15 minutes.
Okay.
Precession, the propeller is a huge spinning piece of metal, aluminum, and that creates a gyroscopic effect. The faster it spins, the more it tends to stay pointed where it is. And when we pitch up, if we press on the gyroscope in pitching up motion, kind of from below the plane, the nose will tend to move to the right. So when we're pitching up, this is a right turning tendency for us. If we're pitching down, this will be a left turning tendency. So again, the maneuver is built so that each of those tendencies, they cycle in their amplitude and some even in their direction throughout the maneuver. Slipstream, that doesn't change. The spinning air around the airframe hits the rudder and the tower yaws the airplane to the left. It is more pronounced at lower speeds when the airplane is getting a lot of air pushed by the prop.
So to clarify that point, you say it doesn't change
Direction.
Oh, okay.
Okay. It changes in amplitude, in magnitude, but not in direction.
Okay.
And the P factor is more pronounced at higher angles of attack when descending blade is biting more air, has higher angle of attack, and so gets higher torque, thrust, higher push on the right side of a descending prop, clockwise rotation, as seen from the cabin, versus the left. At some moment, like on the left climbing turns, all those three of those tendencies will be left turning, and they will be adding up, and they will require a lot of compensation, while on a left climbing turn, less so. Well, there you have it. So mock check ride went well. Yes, there were things that I forgot, but I was able to find them and explain and have a discussion. Now, one main takeaway for me would be to not rush and prepare for the questions better. Obviously, if you are a CFI and you're teaching and you got hit by a question you didn't expect, well, you can say, I don't know, I have to look it up. Or even you can make a mistake, which is worse. If you do make a mistake, acknowledge it. But if you had a task on hand and you screwed that up as a CFI, that will hurt. So that was biggest learning, how I was able to screw up the navigation log. But that's why we practice, so that I don't land on my actual $1,500 check ride with a simple handwritten typo on the task. Would that have failed me? Not necessarily, but that would not be a good impression on DPE and on my own personal recollection of events. So check out Sam's channel, Sam Terrell, also known as Northwest Aeronaut. He is a local CFI in Hillsboro, Oregon, and has a wealth of experience teaching, and very much appreciate his help preparing me for my CFI check ride, and looking forward for more help. Check back for more updates. Fly with Dmitry.